Friends, you've probably seen Professor's genius planning in Money Heist. But today, I'm going to tell you the story of a man whose planning was so unbelievable that it could make you forget even the professor. He wasn't a thief or a gangster, he was just an ordinary teacher. But to free his wife from prison, he created such a master plan that the police, doctors, and the entire system danced to his moves. He forged fake reports, cut phone lines, misled the police, and executed every step like life itself was a game of chess. Because for him, this wasn't a crime. It was the final move of love. The story begins on a dark and silent night. A college teacher named John Brennan is driving his car at full speed, completely terrified. On the back seat lies an injured drug dealer, a man John himself has shot. Now the question is, how far can a simple college teacher go to break his wife out of prison? You'll only understand the answer when you hear the genius plan he created, a plan so brilliant that even the police were left shocked. The story takes us back 3 years earlier, when John was living a happy life with his wife Lara and their son Luke in their beautiful home. Lara suffered from diabetes, so like every morning, she was taking her insulin injection. But then she noticed a small blood stain on her jacket. She quickly rushed to the sink to wash it off. Before she could understand what was happening, the door suddenly burst open. The police stormed inside and, without asking a single question, arrested Lara for murder. Later, the court found Lara guilty and sentenced her to life imprisonment. But even then, there was no solid evidence strong enough to force the police to reopen the investigation. In fact, all the existing evidence pointed directly against Lara. One of her co-workers claimed she had seen Lara leaving the murder scene. Blood stains were found on her jacket, and the murder weapon carried her fingerprints. After seeing all this, the lawyer clearly told John that the case was hopeless. But instead of giving up, John made up his mind and said firmly, "She will come out of that prison no matter what happens." After that, he went to meet Lara and told her everything the lawyer had said. Tears filled John's eyes, and the moment Lara saw them, she understood everything. A wave of hopelessness spread across her face. She broke down crying, as if the last ray of hope inside her had finally died. But it felt like fate was testing John even more. That same night, he received news that Lara had suddenly been admitted to the hospital. Without wasting a single second, he rushed there. But the hospital staff refused to let him meet her. John argued and fought with the doctors and the police for a long time. Eventually, he was allowed to see her for a few moments. When he entered the room, he saw Lara handcuffed to the hospital bed, with a bandage wrapped around her wrist. One glance was enough for John to understand everything. Lara had probably given up on life. In that very moment, something inside John broke, and he silently swore to himself that no matter if the whole world stood against him, he would get Lara out of prison. From that day on, John began preparing for his mission. He started reading every book ever written about prison escapes, gathering every small and big detail he could find. Then he went to meet a man named Damon, someone who had already escaped from prison 7 times. Damon explained to him that if he truly wanted to escape, he would have to keep his mind completely open. He needed to observe the tiny details of everyday prison life and find the cracks in the system where it could be broken from within. And most importantly, he had to decide on a destination beforehand, a place where very few people go, with no tourists around, and far away from roads, buses, trains, or airports. Because when the system collapses, those are the first places the police begin searching. Apart from that, he would need fake documents so convincing that no one could easily identify them as fake, and he would have to flee to another state. But the most important rule was this: all the money had to be in cash, so no transaction could trace his location. That meant John needed to gather enough cash to survive for nearly 5 years, because by then, the case would have cooled down and the search for them would no longer be as intense. The most difficult part of this entire plan was crossing the bridges of Pittsburgh. After 9/11, the police there had learned how to seal the entire city within just 15 minutes. On top of that, John would have to stay away from his parents and friends forever. And if necessary, he might even have to take someone's life. After hearing all this, John returned home. He covered an entire wall with maps and photographs and began calculating every detail of his plan. Whenever he visited Lara in prison, he carefully observed the tiniest details around him. He noticed a hole inside the elevator, and on the other side, some workers were repairing a leak in the ceiling. He also noted which trucks stopped there every single day. John had become so deeply obsessed with the plan that even while teaching at college, he would secretly analyze these details on his laptop. Eventually, he decided to sell his house because this mission required a huge amount of money. Now he needed fake documents. For that, he started visiting one of the city's most dangerous neighborhoods. There, he began buying OxyContin from a dealer and casually asked him about someone who could make fake passports. After many failed attempts, he finally found a man who told him, "If you really want a passport, go to the bar and meet a dealer there." But John was betrayed. The moment he arrived, a group of thugs attacked him and stole all his money. A man named Mike, who was sitting in the same bar, witnessed everything with his own eyes. A few days later, John returned to that same neighborhood, but this time 2 bikes were following him. Somehow he managed to reach his house safely. Just then, the doorbell rang. John opened the door, and standing outside was Mike. Mike said, "I can make fake passports for you." John handed him a few photographs along with some advance money and said in a cold, strict voice, "After today, never come back to my house again. I'll collect the passports somewhere else." Mike agreed, but before leaving, he warned John, "If I don't show up there on time, leave immediately without saying a word." After this, John moved on to the next phase of his plan. He bought a gun from a shop and even learned how to use it from the shopkeeper. The next day, John arrived at the location Mike had given him to collect the passports. After waiting for a long time, he realized Mike was late. But instead of leaving, he stayed there silently. A few moments later, a car drove away from the area, and right after that, Mike finally appeared. Angrily, Mike said, "You're still sitting here? The car that just left belonged to a police officer." Then, while handing over the fake documents, he looked at John and said, "You've become obsessed with this, John, and one day this obsession is going to make you commit a huge mistake." After this, we see John learning how to make a bump key, a special key capable of opening almost any lock. He learned it from the internet, made one himself, and decided he would use it the next time he visited the prison. The day he went to the prison, he placed the bump key along with his normal keys into the metal detector tray. As soon as he crossed the detector, he secretly picked up the key before the police could notice. While walking with the other visitors, John intentionally stayed at the very back of the group. The moment he got a chance, he tried inserting the key into the elevator lock. But unfortunately, the key snapped. Half of it got stuck inside the lock. Without wasting a second, John threw away the remaining piece still in his hand and stood there calmly as if nothing had happened. Within moments, a police officer arrived and spotted the broken key. Immediately, all the prison visitors were questioned. When it was John's turn, he cleverly used the security camera footage to defend himself. Looking at the screen, he said, "That's not even me. This is a taller man. I was standing behind him." The officer still found him suspicious, but suspicion alone wasn't enough to take action, so they let John go. But the moment he stepped outside the prison gates, panic completely took over him. Detective Quinnen noticed everything, and from that moment, he too began suspecting John. Quietly, he started keeping an eye on him, but John had no idea he was being watched. He continued slowly selling off his household belongings, and whenever his brother came to visit, John would hide things from him so nobody could understand what was really happening in his life. One afternoon, John took his son Luke to the park. There, the mother of Luke's friend Carrie invited him to Carrie's birthday party. But John's mind was lost in another world entirely. He was once again focused on preparing his escape plan. During this time, he noticed a new medical van that regularly stopped outside the prison. And at that very moment, a brilliant idea struck his mind. Now he was going to execute his entire plan through that van. He researched Lara's diabetes in detail. Then, for several days, he secretly followed the van to learn its exact schedule and routes. On top of that, he even learned from the internet how to unlock a vehicle using a tennis ball. The next day, John used the same trick. With the help of a tennis ball, he unlocked the medical van and secretly took photographs of Lara's medical reports from inside. Later, he created a fake report showing that Lara's health condition was extremely serious. A few days later, when John went to visit Lara, she gave him terrible news. In just 3 days, she was going to be transferred to an even stricter prison. The moment John heard this, it felt like the ground slipped beneath his feet. Now he had only 3 days left to complete his plan. The biggest problem was that his house still hadn't been sold, and he didn't have the money needed to escape. Finally, John picked up his gun and headed out with the intention of robbing a bank. But even after reaching there, he couldn't force himself to do it. His hands started shaking, and he couldn't gather the courage. He stood outside the bank for a long time, and then quietly walked away. Later, he once again went to visit Lara in prison and told her that he would appeal against her transfer to the other prison. Hearing this, Lara became furious. Because John still refused to accept reality, Lara said, "You're living in a dream, John. You think I can get out of here, but the truth is, that's never going to happen." Finally, in order to stop him, Lara tearfully confessed that she herself had committed the murder. She wanted John to move on with his life and start over with someone else. But John still didn't believe her. He went to meet Lara again, this time with even stronger determination. He looked at her and said, "Don't lose hope. I will get you out of here." Now somehow John had to arrange the money. As night fell, he returned to that dangerous neighborhood once again. There he secretly followed a dealer and eventually reached his boss's house. The moment he got the chance, John suddenly grabbed the dealer, shoved him forward, and forced his way inside the house. During the struggle, the house dog bit John on the leg, but John pointed his gun at them and shouted fearfully, "Alex, lock the dog in the room right now." Then John demanded money. Terrified, they handed over all the cash they had in their pockets. Alex laughed coldly and said, "You don't have the guts to kill anyone. You couldn't even shoot the dog." But suddenly, John poured whiskey all over the floor and set it on fire with a spark. The flames instantly filled the room with fear and panic. Alex panicked and shouted that there was a child inside the house. To save the child, he ran upstairs. But John immediately followed him, using the dealer as a human shield. In reality, this was the move that saved John's life, because Alex had gone upstairs to grab a gun. The moment Alex fired, the bullet hit the dealer standing in front of John. Alex quickly tried to take aim again, but before he could pull the trigger, John fired and killed him in a single shot. After that, John searched every room in the house and soon found a bag full of cash. While escaping, he noticed something terrifying. The dealer was still alive, lying on the floor, groaning in pain and begging for help. And this is where the real story begins, with John driving away while carrying the badly wounded dealer in his car. On the way, his car's taillight got broken. For a moment, John thought about taking the dealer to the hospital, but before he could do anything, the dealer died inside the car itself. In the end, John left the body near a bus stop and then continued with the next part of his plan. He drove to a parking lot and started cutting through a wire fence. Meanwhile, a fire had broken out at Alex's house, and soon the police arrived at the scene. There they found bloodstains on the floor and the broken piece of the car's taillight as evidence. After finishing his work, John went to his parents' house to spend the night. When his father picked up John's bag, he noticed plane tickets inside it. In that very moment, he understood exactly what John was about to do. The next morning, before leaving, John told Luke to hug his grandparents tightly, because deep down he knew this would be their final goodbye. In the end, John's father embraced him strongly and said goodbye with a heavy heart. Finally, the day had arrived. John was ready to execute his plan. He packed everything, tore apart all his maps and planning papers, and threw them into two separate garbage bags. After that, John went to the medical center and immediately cut the phone lines there. Then he quietly entered a van and switched Lara's blood samples. Now, instead of the real medical report, the fake report created by John had been placed there. After completing this step, John dropped Luke off at his friend Carrie's birthday party. Before leaving, he told Carrie's mother, "If I get late, Luke has his grandparents' phone number in his pocket." At the same time, when the doctors at the hospital examined Lara's blood report, they sensed that something was wrong. They tried calling the lab, but the phone lines were dead. Without waiting any longer, they admitted Lara to the hospital based on those reports alone. Meanwhile, the police identified the model of the car through the broken taillight. After further investigation, all the evidence started pointing toward John. The moment the police arrived at John's house, they discovered the wall covered with his maps and detailed planning. Around the same time, the detectives received news that Lara was being transferred to the hospital. Now they were completely certain about John's intentions, and they rushed toward the hospital as fast as possible. But John had already reached there before them. Wearing a doctor's coat, he quietly entered Lara's room. Then he pointed a gun at the police officers guarding her and forced them to unlock Lara's handcuffs. After that, he tied the officers to chairs. But suddenly, Lara refused to escape with him. Hearing this, John completely lost his temper. In anger, he shouted, "Then call your son and tell him his parents are never coming back alive today." Only then did Lara realize how dangerous the situation had become. She understood that if she didn't escape now, John might truly kill someone. Finally, Lara quickly changed into the clothes John had brought for her. But just then, a nurse spotted them. The two immediately rushed into the elevator. Meanwhile, the nurse screamed for security. At the same time, John and Lara quickly removed their white coats and headed straight toward the lobby. But the detectives were already waiting there in ambush. The moment John saw them, he quickly pressed the button for another floor. The detectives immediately ran down the stairs to chase them. As soon as the elevator doors opened, John cleverly threw both white coats near the staircase and quickly stepped back into the elevator with Lara. Seeing the coats, the detectives assumed John and Lara had escaped through the stairs toward the parking lot, so they rushed there immediately. But in reality, John and Lara had already returned to the lobby and slipped out through the main entrance within seconds. After crossing the street, John changed his jacket and blended into a crowd of baseball fans. The crowd was heading toward the station, and hidden among them, John and Lara quietly boarded a train. But the danger still wasn't over. John knew that the police would probably be waiting for them at the next station. So suddenly, he pulled the train's emergency brake. The moment the train stopped, both of them jumped off and realized they were standing right in front of the same parking lot John had visited days earlier. And now the hole he had cut in the fence finally became useful. The two slipped through the opening and reached the spot where John's car was already waiting. Without wasting another second, John sped away at full speed. They successfully crossed the first bridge before the city lockdown could begin. Now the next step was picking up Luke. But this is where John made a small mistake. When he arrived at Carrie's house, he discovered that the birthday party was actually being held at the zoo, and none of them had returned yet. At the same time, the police were searching John's neighborhood. Soon they found the garbage bags containing all of John's planning papers and maps. Meanwhile, John accelerated the car and rushed toward the zoo. But suddenly, he changed routes. Looking at Lara, he said, "If we delay now, all the roads will be blocked, and we won't be able to escape." Then in a quiet voice, he added, "We'll have to leave Luke behind. My parents will take care of him." But Lara was absolutely unwilling to leave without her son. Suddenly, Lara opened the car door and leaned her head outside. At that exact moment, a truck came speeding toward them from the opposite direction. The collision was only seconds away. But at the very last moment, John swerved the car, and the two narrowly escaped death. John immediately stopped the car and looked at Lara. He told her she was right, because he too couldn't live without his son. Finally, he made his decision. he was going back. The two drove straight to the zoo, picked up Luke, and now only one goal remained, crossing the checkpoint somehow. And then suddenly, a brilliant idea struck John. He drove directly to the train station, where he offered a ride to an elderly uncle and aunt standing nearby. Soon, all five of them were heading toward the checkpoint together. At the checkpoint, the guards were searching for a young husband, wife, and their child. But inside John's car were also two elderly passengers. Because of that, nobody became suspicious. The guards barely glanced at the car and waved them through without even checking properly. John finally breathed a deep sigh of relief. After driving a little farther, he safely dropped off the elderly couple in the city and then headed straight toward the Canadian airport. Meanwhile, TV channels were preparing to broadcast their photos as fugitives. But luck was on John's side that day. Their passports had already been checked, and at the exact same moment, the airport security shift changed. The new guard had no idea that John and Lara had already entered the airport. Back at John's house, the police were trying to piece together the torn papers they had found in the garbage. Among them, they discovered a photograph connected to the country of Haiti. Immediately, the police ordered all flights heading to Haiti to be stopped. But this was John's real masterstroke. A little later, Detective Quinnen realized something shocking. The police had recovered only half of the planning papers. John had intentionally hidden the other half so the police would chase the wrong lead. The Haiti clue was nothing more than a distraction. John wanted the police to stay busy searching there while he, Lara, and Luke escaped safely somewhere else. And that's exactly what happened. While the police kept searching in Haiti, John, Lara, and Luke had already boarded a flight to Venezuela. A few days later, we see the three of them starting a brand new life in the city of Caracas, a place where there was no police, no danger, only love and peace. So tell me, could you ever love someone as deeply as John loved Lara? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. If you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to leave a like. Thank you.